So, in case you haven't figured it out by now, I have a process that I go through for sermons, an organization, and I'm going to let you in on my top secret process. Now, Jim, since he's taught classes on how to give a sermon before, he's probably going to hear me say this and say, nope, that's not how you do it. This is my process. First, I find the scripture, and sometimes the scripture is based on a sermon series that I'm doing, or could be based on the lectionary, which takes you through the Bible in a 3-year cycle, or could even be a holiday. Sometimes it's just a verse that I happen to be feeling at the moment. And after I have the scripture, I read articles, I read commentary to help me formulate my ideas. And I look for the whole point of the sermon, the purpose. And then I try to apply it to our daily lives. How the scripture can be meaningful or helpful to us as we live our lives. And finally, then, I try to come up with some sort of connector or an illustration to introduce the scripture. It's usually the attention grabber. That's a lot of fun for me. That's the part that I have the most fun with. And sometimes my connections make a lot of sense, and sometimes my connections are only meaningful to me, or they only connect to me, or they are really far reach for you. But sometimes they may be interesting, sometimes they may be entertaining to you, but they're always entertaining to me. I think I'm hilarious and unbelievably witty. And a lot of times those attention grabbers, those end up being the most memorable parts. Like the time that I talked about running out of gas on the way to visit my in-laws, or the time that my mom was sitting right over there and I talked about how our basement smelled like, she's shaking her head. Yeah, I mentioned that our basement had a particular smell, and I still hear about that. Or the time that I talked about the boys' Three Little Pigs party, or the time that I referenced Monty Python. Those were all good ones, right? But I do have to admit sometimes I reference things that might be a little more obscure, I guess. Might be a little more obscure. And I know that I do because that's when I'm greeted with blank stares. And usually it's after I make some ridiculous Star Wars comment. Because all I see is everybody looking at me like this, and then kind of like this. Or a Lord of the Rings comment, kind of the same thing. So I decided to change my ways. No more, the rest of the month, Han Solo or Yoda references or Luke Skywalker references. No more Hobbits, no more Gandalf, no more bands that no one has heard of, like White Lion. No more Chargers, no more Dan Fouts. I've decided to class things up a little bit, make things more classy, just a little bit more sophistication. And so today my connection will use PBS. It's classic, right? Sophisticated, right? Especially if it's a British show on PBS, then it's very classy, Rick knows what I'm talking about, very sophisticated. See, a few weeks ago I took my lovely wife out on the town, and we wanted to do something exciting and crazy, so we decided to go sit in some recliners. Now, to me, that means going to a furniture store and trying out all their recliners. But to her, that means going to a movie. And in Avon, they have recliners. You guys have ever been to a movie theater in Avon? Recliners. Wonderful idea. And so we went there. The only problem was they didn't have a whole lot of movies showing, and so we went to, I would say, Downton Abbey. We went to the movie Downton Abbey. Any fans of Downton Abbey? Okay, so I really try to class it up. There's only 2 people that know. Okay. Really? You watched Downton Abbey, Rick? Well, it was good. It was good. I believe you. It's very, it's actually very good. If you've never seen the show, I've never seen the show. Megan had watched all the series, and so she's very excited about the movie. I have never seen any of the episodes, but I'm an awesome husband, so I went anyway. And I like how no one laughed at that except for Jim. But actually, it was really pretty good. It was pretty good, and I had a good time, and that whole recliner thing, so that kind of made it really a good time. So it was pretty much a win-win for me. And the whole plot of the movie centered around the preparations for a visit from the King and Queen of England. And Downton Abbey is this super large, fancy estate in the country. And I should have asked Megan when I was giving the synopsis of it, but I think the owner is like an earl or a duke or something, right? Earl, okay, so he's an earl, and their money and their resources are starting to dwindle a bit, but they're trying to keep up the appearances of wealth and fanciness. And there are these servants who take care of everything. They take care of everything, and it's like a little city. It's like a little city that runs. And every servant has this different level of importance on the social rank of the place. And the show is about how these 2 groups, the nobility and the servants, how they function within this hierarchy and how they interact. And the movie is about the King and Queen stopping by for a visit, a short visit. They're only going to be there for a few hours, and we get to watch all the drama unfold and all the fuss about the preparations for the nobility, and all the servants and the nobility are trying to make Downton Abbey good enough to welcome the king. They want to make it good enough to have it. So everyone from the earl down to the lowliest servant, everyone is excited about this wonderful honor. It's a tremendous honor, and even though it's brief, it's still this wonderful honor. And everyone wants to see the royalty. Everyone wants to have a chance to just catch a glimpse of the king and queen. Try to impress them, right? And now the reason they're all going bananas about this is that we associate royalty with power. With power. We treat members of that class differently. We make assumptions about what they think. We make assumptions about what they are like. And it's fun to fantasize. It's fun to fantasize about their privilege. It's fun to fantasize about their glamour. And we love looking at how fancy they are. And we love looking at their expensive jewelry and expensive clothes. And so, what does all this have to do with today's sermon? Well, that's an excellent question, as always. But today is Christ the King Sunday. It's Christ the King Sunday. Growing up, I didn't really know anything about Christ the King Sunday. And I've learned a bit about it since then. And first of all, it's only been around for about 100 years or so. It started in 1926, after World War I was over, in the aftermath of World War I, and it was started in response to the spread of communism, to the growth of atheism, and to society becoming more secular. And it's always the Sunday right before Advent, because it's like the grand conclusion to that liturgical calendar and that liturgical journey through the Gospels. And I read this about it. It says, its purpose is to celebrate the coming reign of Christ as King of the earth and his completion of the renewed creation that marks the fullness of the kingdom of God. So that movie, the Downton Abbey movie, really fits in well with Christ the King Sunday. And the Old Testament reading for today is from Jeremiah. And here's a brief background of this to give you some context. It takes place, this reading from Jeremiah, takes place about 600 years before Jesus was born. And the Jewish people were in exile. The reigning superpower of the time, Babylon, had just invaded. They had destroyed the temple. And Jeremiah was a prophet who saw all of this coming. He saw it coming and he tried to warn the people, but it happened anyway. And so now the Lord spoke through Jeremiah, but this time he was offering images of hope, offering images of promise, so that the Jews could hold on to the stories that they had. They could hold on to the culture that they had, the faith that they had, even in the harshest of circumstances. But the ironic part of all this is that the Babylonians were not the only cause of the Jews' exile. The problem was that the kings and the priests of Judah were corrupt. And so they were corrupt, and instead of caring for their flock, instead of caring for their people that were in exile, they scattered them. And instead of helping the people, they were exploiting them. They were taking advantage of them. And instead of following God's laws, they were basically following the law that might makes right. But even so, through all of this, Jeremiah offered hope. He offered hope through the promises of God. He offered them hope because he told them to look beyond the now, look beyond the horizon, look beyond and see the promise of a new shepherd. And so that's the context of this reading. This is from Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 1 through 6. It starts, "Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Therefore, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to the shepherds who tend my people. Because you have scattered my flock and driven them away and have not bestowed care on them, I will bestow punishment on you for the evil you have done. I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, and will bring them back to their pasture, where they will find fruitful and increase, where they will be fruitful and increase in number. I will place my shepherds over them who will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid or terrified, nor will any be missing, declares the Lord. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is right in the land. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. This is the name by which he will be called, the Lord, our righteous Savior." So here, Jeremiah is telling them about the coming of Christ, Christ the King. And Jesus, the Good Shepherd, Jesus the King, gathers us, especially those most likely to be left behind. Jesus the King, Jesus the Good Shepherd, is willing to speak the truth. Jesus the Good Shepherd, Jesus the King, bids us to lay down our burdens and to come to him for rest. So this is the kind of shepherding. This is the kind of kingship that Jesus brings. But that kingship is costly. That kingship is costly. The kings of the world despise that kind of kingship. They will try to resist it. They want to stamp it out. And that's what we see on the hill of Calvary. But this is the type of king Jesus is. He works through forgiveness. He works through compassion. He works through peace rather than evil, greed, or fear. And that costs Jesus everything. Everything. Paul takes us through this in his letter to the Colossians. This is from 1 Colossians chapter 1, verses 11 through 20. It says, "May you be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves. In him, in whom we have redemption, forgiveness of sins. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to all reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through the blood shed on the cross." So, this is about Christ the King. Christ the King, the supreme Son of God. The King of Kings. The King and the Queen of England in Downton Abbey have nothing on the magnificence and the majestic, kingly nature of Jesus. But there was nothing regal about Jesus at all. Nothing. He had a ragtag group of followers from the lowest classes of society. The kids downstairs have been studying the first disciples of Jesus, and they have learned that he attracted Samaritans and lepers and tax collectors and fishermen, dishonored women. He attracted the poor. He attracted those that were marginalized by society. He attracted those that were marginalized by the ruling class and the religious leaders. Now, at best, Jesus could easily be confused with the many other fanatics and the rabble-rousers of the time that appeared on the scene during Rome's occupation of Palestine. And it's ironic when we look at the fact that Jesus' parentage was even questionable due to the fact that Mary became pregnant before Mary and Joseph. That was not your typical regal, majestic, kingly king. But Jesus earned his kingship by becoming a servant. By becoming a servant first. He said, if you want to become great, you must first become a servant. If you want to become great, you must first become a servant. So Jesus, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, washed his disciples' feet, fed the hungry, took pity on all who suffered. He ate with sinners. He forgave sins. He spoke out against injustice. And he challenged the status quo. He welcomed the social outcasts. And he took on this mantle of poverty and obscurity. And although he existed in the form of God, Jesus became human. He became human and lived among those that were deemed unworthy by society. Jesus was not elevated to king status in order for us to dress him up in regal roles that place him far above humanity. If you look at any of the paintings, especially done during the Renaissance, Jesus was outfitted in royal robes and royal crowns and in marvelous and majestic settings. But Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. It's not of this world. And the least in this world are considered the greatest in his kingdom. Because our King, Christ the King, is no ordinary king. Now we're about to enter the season of Advent. 4 weeks of preparation for our King. And what does it look like when we prepare? What does it look like when we prepare for Christ the King? And it probably isn't much like Downton Abbey's preparations when they were looking or preparing for the visit from the King and Queen of England. It doesn't involve polishing a lot of silver. It doesn't involve figuring out exactly what to cook or obsessing about how the house looks. But at the same time, I think there are similarities. I think there are similarities because they took the visit very seriously. It was important to them, and they did their absolute best because it mattered to them what the king and queen thought. It mattered to them. So what can we do to prepare? What can we do? Are we striving to be our absolute best? Are we doing all that we can do to live like Jesus wants us to live? So maybe we aren't preparing for the luxury. Maybe we aren't preparing for the lavishness like in the movie. Instead, we are preparing for a visit from royalty who always greets us with forgiveness. He always greets us with acceptance. We are preparing for a visit from royalty who always greets us with love. A visit from a king who humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death on a cross. A king who prefers the company of the lost and the lonely and the least and the last. A king who can hear the cry of the needy. A king who can hear the cry of the helplessness, of the hopeless, of the helpless, the cry of the desperate. A king who knows us, who loves us, who sacrificed everything for us. A king who promises us an eternal life of love, grace, peace, and joy. So let us prepare for the ride.